Ta-da! There we go. So guys, welcome to week 6 of Prep Skills for University. This is an exciting week because I think this topic is so timely for every single one of us at this time of term. And Emma was just sharing before we started here around the value of this, especially because we've just come through the last few weeks of learning about time management. We're learning about our temperament types and our learning styles, and recognizing that sometimes if we procrastinate a lot, or if there's other things that are really weighing us down, it starts to weigh heavily on us. And then we adding in work and family and study and everything else. And so we really need to recognize when our bodies are starting to build up stress. So this is extremely timely for us to get started on today. And as we go through this module, I really want you to focus on yourself. Like, think about everything that we're learning about, what you're reading about. Focus on yourself as a student and what you can do to recognize and then overcome this stress within your body. So today we are very privileged to have Sarah Birch here. Now, Sarah is one of my colleagues here on the Bundaberg campus, and she forms part of our student counselling team. And Sarah's going to tell us all about what they do, the support they offer you, and she's actually going to run our whole lecture today. So Sarah, thank you very, very much. I'm going to be on chat today, so if you guys have any questions, or I'll be throwing questions at you, jump on chat and we'll start chatting. And Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Trixie, and good morning, everyone. So yes, Trixie has me, my stress levels rising this morning. I don't usually present lectures, but I have done this one a couple of times, and I love coming along and talking to all the prep skills students. And we've had some good feedback about it, not just around the time of it, but the content. So I'm hoping this morning is a valuable use of your time, because I know you're all busy people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my my slideshow and we'll get started. Just a couple of little things. Happy for you guys to fire questions away as we're going if you need to. Maybe just pop them in the chat and Trixie can let me know what they are. And then we will also have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you sort of want to talk a little bit more about it, maybe just write it down and we can come to that at the end. So just give me a second and I will share my screen. Okay, can you guys see that?
Sarah, it's showing the one with the little slides on the slide.
Yep, I'm just about to pop it up to the slideshow. How's that? Is that better? Or which one can you see? Can you see my view?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you might be in presenter mode. Yeah, I think you might be in presenter mode. That's what we can see, says.
Oh, okay. I am a bit of a beginner when it comes to this stuff. So just give me a second. Lovely. Okay, so as we all know now, we're going to be talking about how we can manage our stress by enhancing our resilience, with a bit of a focus, obviously, in the academic environment today. So I'd just like to start this morning. Okay, so I'd like to start this morning by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I stand today, and that is the Tarrabalang Bunda, Gurang Gurang, Bailai and Gurang people. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and also to any First Nations people who are present today. If anyone would like to add an acknowledgement of their own, please feel free to do that in the chat. Given the volume of people, we won't sort of stop for that today, but please do feel free to share your acknowledgements. So today I'm going to be talking about stress. So what is stress? How might it show up in the academic environment, and how we can support ourselves to manage it when it does. Given our topic, I thought it might be nice to start with just taking a moment to settle into this space. Some of us might have had a bit of a busy, hectic morning getting here. So just take a moment to get comfortable in the space you're in, make any adjustments you need, and also, let go of those thoughts and feelings that have perhaps preceded you being here today, and take a couple of nice, slow, deep breaths just to settle in. Oh, okay. So what is stress? Stress is our body's way of preparing to deal with a challenge. It's impossible to avoid because it's everywhere and everyone experiences it. How we experience stressful events and our ability to manage that is likely different to the person sitting next to us or those who are, around us today. But there are some commonalities in how our brains and bodies interpret and respond to stress. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. So there are different types of stress. There's acute stress, which is that single episode of a new and challenging event. So think about a roller coaster, or perhaps stepping out to cross the road and not noticing that there's a car there. So it's that short burst of stress with a rapid recovery. Can be helpful, particularly in if you think about that car, often our bodies react before we've even caught up with what's going on. So there is episodic acute stress. So there's frequent episodes of acute stress over a period of time. So if you think about people who work in quite high stress jobs, emergency response workers, it might be also a positive kind of stress if you think about a new relationship that moves quite quickly. So you might be talking about moving in, might be experiencing pregnancy, starting a family quite soon. So those events that are perceived as positive can still be stressful. And then there's chronic stress. So that's that high levels of stress that happen over an extended period of time. So this is often not associated with change or challenge, but rather that long-term, constant, unrelenting stress on our body, mind, and spirit. So if you think about people living in extreme poverty, people with chronic health conditions, it might be living in an environment of war or prison, might be living in a family which is quite dysfunctional. It might be turning up every day to a job that we actually don't like and isn't good for us, but we feel unable to leave. So what are some of the signs that tell us that we're under stress? And as we have a look through this, just have a look through with that lens around, if I'm experiencing these symptoms of stress, what's going to be the impact on my study? So having no energy and not being able to sleep aren't going to be overly helpful. Lowered sex drive, might be frustrating, might not impact study so much. Depression, anxiety can be quite debilitating when you're attempting to do high-level study. Headaches, chronic pain, feeling sick, having digestive issues, those things can really impact on your ability to be able to study. So the signs and symptoms that we are under stress are different for everyone and can vary with the level of stress we're experiencing. So you could have one or all of these symptoms. They could be mild, they could be severe. An important consideration is that ignoring these symptoms can actually lead to increased stress. So if I give you an example, imagine you're studying full time, maybe not so hard to imagine for some people, but you get offered a full-time job and you decide to accept because you need the finances. As you endeavor to fit everything in and meet deadlines at both work and university, you might find yourself sleeping less. You might be using energy drinks or drinking coffee to keep yourself going. You might withdraw from spending what little free time you have with your friends and family or engaging in activities you enjoy, just because it's too hard and frustrating. So now imagine if you were to continue to do that for 1 month, 1 term, or even perhaps a year. So a state of chronic stress doesn't happen overnight. Often we have those warning signs, but we may choose to ignore or persevere them for many, many reasons. So this continual exposure to stress can weaken our ability to manage in all areas of our life. So behaviorally, we might find that our relationships start to become challenging, problematic. We might turn to substances to keep ourselves going, disengage from those activities. We might also start avoiding stressful situations, but they may actually need to be something that we need to deal with. So think about university. If it's causing a level of stress and you decide not to study and do your assessments, that end result's not going to be a positive one. Emotionally, you might feel tense, anxious, irritable. You might have a lack of enthusiasm or joy. Those physical symptoms we talked about, headaches, difficulty sleeping, muscle aches and pains, your gastrointestinal disorders, changes in appetite, and cognitive. So what are our thoughts doing? Often they're quite negative. There might be lots of worry. You might not be able to concentrate. You might start forgetting things, difficulty making decisions, and experiencing bad dreams, which is going to make sleep even more challenging. So if you think about that previous example I gave of a student working and studying full time, they're not taking breaks or time to care for themselves. Imagine they continue to socially withdraw, increase their use of caffeine to keep them alert, and they might even start introducing painkillers to deal with the constant head and body aches. So how do you think they would be feeling physically, emotionally, or cognitively? Do you think their relationships will be thriving? And what about their academic and work progress? So the good news is that by identifying the signs of stress and addressing the source, we can de-escalate the impact. So it doesn't have to keep climbing. We can help to start bringing it down the other way. And we are just going to focus in this space for a little bit. I know it kind of gets a bit heavy, but I think it's important to understand the potential if we don't take care of ourselves and manage our stress levels. So chronic and continuing stress left untreated can lead to long-term physical and psychological symptoms. So in Australia in 2020, it was estimated that approximately 60% of people experienced at least one significant stressor in the past 12 months. And that rose to 83% for people with a pre-existing mental health diagnosis. Now, if we factor in, what's been happening globally with COVID and, financial situations and housing crises, I would say those figures have risen significantly since then. But, have a look here at some of the conditions that chronic and continued stress can contribute to. So it's worsening mental health, worsening physical health, and often they're interrelated as well. So continued stress without relief leads to a condition called distress. And Helen Stallman, who developed the Care, Collaborate and Connect training and My Coping app, which we'll have a look at a little bit further along, she actually did a study that was published back in 2010, so a little bit ago, but still relevant for us here in this environment, is that there's an increased rate of psychological distress in university students. So it actually highlighted the need for early interventions to prevent development of mental health concerns. So, and then the Australian Bureau of Statistics did a more recent study of mental health and wellbeing in 2020, 2021. And this is some of the results from that. So 15% of Australians experience high or very high levels of psychological distress, more women than men, so slightly more women than men. And it's actually younger Australians, so those in the 16 to 34-year age group were more likely to experience high or very high levels of psychological distress. So yeah, one of those times where you're grateful for getting older, it pushes you into the next category where there's a little less stress apparently. So what are some of the things that can trigger stress? This list is going to be limitless, really, because stress can occur for a seemingly endless array of reasons. Can be external sources outside of ourselves. So think about family conflict, interpersonal conflict with, friends or, even peers. It could be, loss or disappointment, not getting that job you really want or not getting the mark that you wanted on your assessment. academic deadlines is definitely something that causes stress. It could be internal, so it might be something that's happened historically for us. So a past trauma or a negative experience that's actually changed our perspective and the way we are in the world, so can be creating ongoing stress or stress triggers for us. Um, Pre-existing anxiety can actually, mean that our threshold or our stress triggers are a little bit different than they are for other people, and we might find ourselves being triggered more readily. It might just be that you're a naturally worrisome person. So medical conditions, if you think about someone with a diagnosis of cancer, so that in itself stressful, but even the treatment, the radiation, the chemotherapy, and what that's physically doing to your body is putting your body under stress, even though the purpose of it is to save lives. And use of drugs and alcohol often, comes with a whole range of other psychosocial considerations that, can really build on that cumulative stress. So I'm wondering, can you think of a few things that cause you stress? It could be traffic on the way in today. Might be that there's a uni assessment due. Maybe you want it to be perfect. It might be that there's bills to pay. I know in Bundaberg we've got our rates coming up. That's a nice big bill. You might be planning a wedding, a beautiful event, but it can be really stressful. It could be something bigger. It could be climate change. It could be the health housing crisis. So happy for you guys to, pop a few things up in the chat there if you want to around what causes you stress, because I think they are just countless and individual.
We got a few popping up here.
Yeah.
Some ideas like Kevin says driving. Bree raises, trauma. A few people have actually said trauma, past trauma.
Yep.
Work can do it. Assessments, we all know that. Chelsea has a funny one, my toddler, which most us mums really can appreciate that.
Yep.
Deadlines, money, work, pre-existing medical conditions. Yeah. Yep. Raising teenagers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to just reflect on. It's the things that, are really positive in our lives that sometimes can be the cause of stress as well. So, and yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, because it's not so easy to just get rid of them then, is it? So, and that's part of, why we need to manage the impact of that stress and try and balance it out a little. So I think, in study-related stress triggers, there are lots of, stress triggers here in the academic environment. So, writing essays, meeting those deadlines, group assessments can be really stressful for some people, the relationship dynamics and navigating that space. Delivering presentations, a lot of people are quite uncomfortable with getting up in front of everyone and being the center of attention. Exams, there might be relationship tension or conflict with, with your academics or perhaps with your peers, or just finding time to fit it all in. So just acknowledging, yep, there's stress everywhere. So when you think about, how some of those things that trigger your stress can make you feel, and again, happy for you to pop up in the chat box, if you have that awareness around when you are stressed, what that can feel like. It might be, what are your thoughts saying? What does that feel like in your body? Or perhaps even, how do you behave when you're stressed? So some people might find that they start rushing around, they can't think clearly, they might get irritable, they might get impatient, they might feel sick in their stomach, tense muscles, aches and pains. We got other stuff there in the chat, Trixie.
Oops, I'm just about to write the question, but guys, throw some thoughts up about how does stress actually really impact you, and in respect especially to what Sarah's got on this screen.
Yeah. So most of us have heard about the fight or flight response. So this is what's evolved as a survival mechanism, and part of being human is we all experience this. So what it is, it's a carefully orchestrated hormonal and physiological response, which is aimed to prepare us to survive a perceived threat. Okay. So if you think about back in the prehistoric times, often the things that were, triggering our stress were fairly life and death. It might have been a wild animal. It could have been, that you were separated from your tribe, those sorts of things. So often you would actually need to be fighting or fleeing in those situations. But what we're finding nowadays is that we have so much more going on than back then. So what's happening more so now is often our stress can be triggered by things that aren't actually threatening at all. But because of that fight and flight response, we actually feel like it's a life and death situation. So if I just share with you a story which helps illustrate this point. So I had an appointment in town before work this morning. I was already running late to begin with because I slept in, being Monday morning. And then my child had a uniform crisis. So, yep, the one shirt they needed this week wasn't clean. So I got every red light then on my way to the appointment. And then I also happened to get stopped by a train. So running late, getting later. It wasn't just any train, it was a goods train. So one of those ones that seems like it goes on forever. So there is many, many, many carriages. I didn't count them because I knew that my stress levels were building. I got to the appointment driving quite erratically and angrily, trying to get there quick. And because I was late, there was other people had been put in before me. Once I actually got through that appointment, I then had to drive all the way back through those traffic lights to get to work. So in themselves, not huge issues, definitely not life-threatening, but they accumulated and layered on top of each other so that I found myself feeling very stressed and overwhelmed. We're going to come back to that scenario from a different perspective in a moment. But what I'd like to do is I'd just like to share this video goes for about 4 minutes and it gives us a really good overview of how stress impacts our brains. Yep.
Sarah, I'm just going to quickly jump in.
Yeah.
I just heard some whisperings from what the students were talking about in that example.
Sure.
In that example, you recapped and I think explained it really well. When they're layered one after the other, it kind of almost feels like the universe is against you at that particular point in time, which builds.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Sure does. And when we come back to it, we're going to look at some really practical examples of how we can actually break that cycle and perhaps stop it from building so intensely. So keep that example in mind and we will revisit it shortly as well. Oh, thanks, Emma. Now, hopefully you'll be able to hear and see this.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all, though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
Okay. I don't know about anyone else, but it's, that's a heavy space when you think about the amount of stress we experience and what it can actually be doing to us as well. So, what do? Do we freak out? Do we stress more about what's stressing us? Sometimes. Or do we do option B? Do we keep calm, develop some healthy coping strategies that help us to balance out the everyday stress we're experiencing so that we can manage situations in a healthier way? I'm going for option B, and I'm hoping most of you will be as well. So basically, if we summarize what we just heard then, if we activate a branch of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, what it actually does is it signals to our body that we're not under threat and it helps us to rest and digest or calm down. So what we want is our helpful coping strategies to actually bring about that parasympathetic nervous system activation so that we can balance out that fight and flight mode. Yeah. And by developing regular healthy coping strategies, then we can start to experience more resilience to stress. So when we talk about resilience, it's that capacity to be able to face, overcome, and perhaps at times even be strengthened by those experiences of adversity. So commonly referred to as that ability to bounce back. So building our coping strategies supports us to become more resilient to stress. And when we're more resilient to stress, we can manage it better and avoid adding on to it to the point where we become emotionally overwhelmed. So how do we do this? How do we manage our stress? The key thing I always like to remember is the goal's not always to alleviate stress, but rather reduce the impact of it. So if you think about uni, we know that uni is a source of stress. Does that mean you stop coming? Hopefully not, by developing some strategies to be able to manage the stress that university throws at you, whether it's time management, whether it's, spending time doing relaxing activities, whatever it is for you, that's going to help you manage that stressful environment better. So often what we need to do is we need to turn towards the things that are causing us stress. And that can be really hard and uncomfortable sometimes. But if we identify our triggers, know what actually, sets off our stress, know what that does to us, how do we feel when we're stressed, then we can develop those coping strategies to help. So I'm just going to play another little video. So this is Helen Stallman I was talking about early, and she has developed a Care, Collaborate, Connect program. It's aimed at university students and helping them cope with stress, but it's available for everyone. And there is actually an app for those of you who are app people, and it's called My Coping Plan. And what it allows you to do is develop your own little coping plan and identify those areas where you might need to build supports to help you deal with stress. So I do recommend you check that out if you're interested in looking a little bit further into it. But we'll just go ahead and have a listen to what Helen has to say about coping strategies, and then we'll dive into those a little bit more.
We all get distressed sometimes. We all have coping strategies. Things we do when we're distressed. Often we're not conscious of them, we just do things. Our goal always is to feel better. Coping with distress can be considered on a continuum, with distress at one end and our natural survival instinct protecting us from death at the other end. Coping strategies can be healthy or unhealthy. One example of a healthy coping strategy is coping self-talk. That's our inner voice acknowledging the emotion we're feeling and reminding us that we can cope. For example, you're really angry about how she treated you. Take some time to calm down before working out what to do next. Other examples of healthy coping strategies are crying, taking some deep breaths to calm down, focusing on the present moment rather than worrying about what might happen next, or replaying something that has happened in our minds over and over, going outside and getting some exercise, listening to calming music, distracting ourselves with something we enjoy doing, talking to a trusted friend, or spending time with people. Healthy coping strategies are things that help us feel calmer. After using healthy coping strategies, we feel more confident that we're able to cope with distress now and in the future. Healthy coping strategies help us survive. When we don't have healthy coping strategies, or we can't remember them, we still do things to try to feel better. Unhealthy coping strategies are things that may feel good momentarily, but are likely to cause us problems or hurt us later on. Some examples of unhealthy strategies are negative self-talk, such as, "You're a failure." This can make the situation and the future seem hopeless. Yelling, getting into arguments with others, or behaving aggressively can damage relationships and make us feel out of control. Emotional eating can increase our negative self-talk. Alcohol and drugs can make us act more impulsively, feel more depressed, and damage our health. Withdrawing from our social network can make us feel more lonely and depressed. Suicidal thoughts can become a habit, and thinking about them regularly can make suicide seem like a good option. When we feel overwhelmed and can't think of any other strategies, suicidal thoughts can start coming to mind because it is part of our makeup for our minds to keep looking for a solution. Health professionals are people who can provide temporary support for all of us when we feel overwhelmed. They help us cope when we need more healthy strategies. It is a healthy coping strategy to reach out for support when we need it. Professional support can be low intensity, such as telephone helplines and chat lines, if we need someone to talk to. It can be stepped up to more intensive services as we need more support. GPs and counsellors are useful to talk problems through with and help with identifying and connecting us with more intensive supports if needed. Psychologists and psychiatrists can treat mental illnesses that might be affecting our ability to cope. And if we are particularly overwhelmed, hospitals and emergency services are there to provide us with more intensive support. A coping plan is our own individual plan to remind us to use healthy coping strategies when we are distressed. It includes coping self-talk and calming down strategies. Emergency services are at the end of all our coping plans to use if and when we need immediate support.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to have a look at some of those external and internal stresses and what we might be able to do to support ourselves with them, some ideas for those people that are wanting to sort of build on or maybe don't have any really good solid coping strategies in place, healthy ones at the moment. So I thought it would be interesting to start with if we think about external stresses, because we know that each of us turns up to this environment with our own lives and things happening outside of this. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a theory that talks about motivation. So what we need to feel motivated to accomplish the things in our lives is we need to have our needs met at each level, starting at the bottom and working our way up. So if we consider how this theory might be applicable in the academic environment then, so to experience motivation to fulfill our potential and make the most of our abilities, which is pretty much what uni is about, then we need to have met our needs at all of the other levels first, because that self-actualization is up the top there. That's, you know, expanding on our goals and our dreams. So first we need to fulfill our basic survival needs. So we need adequate sleep, we need proper nutrition, we need water, clothing. Those basic survival needs need to be met. Then we need to feel safe emotionally and physically. Okay, so that might be we need appropriate health care. It might be that we need a job to finance our lifestyle. It might be our family and our ability to have a social network. Then we need to have a sense that we're respected by others and ourselves. So within our social network and our community, that we feel we belong. Okay. Once we've done all those things, and self-esteem. So it's that sense that we're not just respected by others, but also by ourselves. So we have a healthy sense of self. Once we've achieved those things, then we can move on to the top level there. So the bottom four levels of that are considered deficiency needs. So that means if we don't meet those needs, if we haven't slept, if we haven't eaten, perhaps, you know, we've had a big argument with a loved one and we haven't sort of addressed that and we're trying to go straight into study without meeting those basic needs, it's going to be a little bit difficult, because with those deficiency needs, if we don't meet them, they become noisier and noisier. So you think about if you haven't eaten, your appetite gets more and more, you might get hungrier and hungrier. Okay. The top level, so self-actualization is actually a being need. So it doesn't stem from a lack of something. It's not, oh, I don't have enough knowledge, I need to acquire more. It's actually something that touches us more deeply than that. So it's that, you know, I need to fulfill my potential. And when I do that, I actually feel like I want to keep going and do that more. So the more I'm able to address those lower needs and tend to them through my self-care, the more I'm going to be able to get to the tip of that pyramid and do the study I want, do well at the study I want, which is going to motivate and spur me to go on further. So external stresses can be varied for everyone. Some of them you might be able to manage on your own. Some of them you might not, just depending on, you know, the gravity of that. So if it is you're experiencing homelessness, you might need to reach out to some crisis housing services. You might need to connect with the chaplain here on campus or myself for some knowing where they are and how you can touch base with those. It might be that you've had an argument with a partner. That might be something that you're able to navigate that space yourself. If it's that you've had ongoing conflict in a relationship for a long period of time, you might need someone to help you navigate that. So just thinking about all those external stresses and how they may be impacting you in the academic environment. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sort of go to some of these internal stresses, which I think sometimes can be just as debilitating, if not more so, than the external stresses. They're kind of in us, and for some of us, it's not having that sense of how you deal with that, and they can be very persistent. So if we think about coping self-talk, so we actually have approximately 50,000 thoughts a day, and not all of them are true. So we may actually attach to that and feel like they're all true. So when we talk about negative and positive self-talk are the things we say to ourselves that make us feel good. Negative self-talk doesn't, okay? Those thoughts aren't fact, and yet we often react and feel like they are. So it's interesting to note that regardless of how strongly our bodies respond to stress, it's actually our cognitive assessment, so those thoughts and how we process that cognitively, that makes the most impact on our emotional reaction. So if I give you an example, if you had a particularly challenging assessment coming up that you're not sure where to start with, negative self-talk might go something like this. I'm such an idiot. Why didn't I listen in class? I don't have a clue what to do. And I can't ask people because then they'll know I wasn't paying attention. They'll think I'm stupid. I'm never going to be able to finish this assessment, and I'm never going to be able to finish uni. Feels pretty awful, doesn't it? Okay. So let's have a look at the next slide then, which will give us some strategies to challenge and reframe those thoughts. So this is from reachout.com, another great resource or website that you can check out if you like to. Has lots of self-directed strategies and supports on there. So if we're wanting to use this with the negative self-talk around completing an assessment, we need to actually become aware of our thoughts around the assessment process. So we need to actually tune into those thoughts. We need to assess whether they're positive or negative. And then one way of actually helping you to grow your awareness of your thoughts is doing what we call a thought diary. So it's actually spending some time each day writing down some of the thoughts that have been strong or persistent and sort of looking at whether they have been negative or positive and how they've made you feel. You can challenge your self-talk. So there's evidence, is there actually evidence to support what we're thinking? So is it right that if I ask for help, people are going to think that I'm not stupid? Is it going to make it worse for me? Am I not going to be able to finish university just because I'm struggling with this assessment? Okay. One way to challenge or I guess reframe some of our self-talk is to think about, because sometimes we can find it hard to do for ourselves what we do for others. So imagine that you have a friend in a similar situation. What would you say to them? Is there anything you can do to change how they feel? Okay. And then apply that to yourself. You might want to change that self-talk. So you can use, positive psychology. And I heard Trixie say she sent you out some great clips, which I'm sure have been helpful. So, how can we make a list of some more positive comments? So instead of I don't have a clue and I can't ask anyone, it might sound something more like, it might feel hard, but asking my lecturer a question may help me understand this assessment a little better. Yeah. So perception. I'm not going to ask you to doubt everything, but being able to question your beliefs and thoughts regularly can help you have a different perception on events. So perception's the way we think about things, and what it does, it affects our emotions. So it affects how we feel and how we behave and our physiology. So it can bring on that stress response. So that's all about our perception. We need the ability to see that failures are not always the end. They can be, well, they are a part of life, and they can be a really positive learning experience if we frame them that way. So how we perceive those stresses, we know that chronic stress can affect our health and how we think of ourselves. So if we can reframe it to a more positive self-talk, that can affect our resilience and our ability to cope a little bit better. And I love Edison's little quote there. I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So sometimes we do have to keep trying and trying to find the way that does work for us. Perfectionism. I'm not sure how many people here struggle with this, but I'll put my hand up. It's that feeling, that things are never good enough, right? So what that actually does, it feeds our amygdala's alarm system. So if we're telling ourselves things aren't good enough, that's going to bring about that sense of fear and activate that fight and flight. So we're constantly telling our brain and body that we haven't done enough and we've got to keep doing more. And that's exhausting. So it doesn't let you adjust your thinking to fit the situation. Yeah. So it's like that, oh, this assessment's not good enough. It's never going to be good enough. I'm not going to pass. I'll have to keep going. Instead of going, oh, this is the first assessment I've ever done at a university level. I've learned a lot. I've done the best I can. I'm going to put it in and I'm going to see what my lecturers give feedback that my lecturers give me. Oh, if we aim for perfectionism, it's impossible to achieve. So there is no such thing as perfect. There is always going to be comparison, and there's always going to be something better and worse than out there. So that fear that it produces can result in that procrastination. So I know that's something that's really common. If this feels overwhelming and too big to do, moving towards it isn't going to be something you're going to want to do. It's going to be, oh, that just makes me feel really awful and uncomfortable and it's all too hard. So you start second guessing yourself. You might give up or, become overwhelmed and have a meltdown. So that can also be part of the process that can help you kind of pick yourself up again. But, if we can support ourselves not to get to that state in the first place, I would think that's probably preferable. And it's that vicious cycle, isn't it? We then, that can manifest into guilt and shame. So, and that again feeds our amygdala's alarm system. So a little strategy that can help with this, with perspective, is imagine you're above the earth looking down. You can see all that's going on our beautiful big planet. So how important and significant is what you are stressing about when you consider what other people in the world are going through? Is it life-threatening? What are you trying to prove and who are you trying to prove it to? Is this perfectionism past its use by date? Is it time to let go of that? Is it something left over from school days, perhaps, or from your childhood relationships? If it's a huge problem, you might need to seek some help with it. Worry. So worry constantly becomes chronic stress, and it means your brain never gets to rest. So your brain's not built to be constantly on alert scanning for threat. Okay, and that's what worry does. It tells us that there's a threat out there that's going to overwhelm us. So what can you do? Take some deep breaths, step back from the issue using, that strategy we just talked about. Give your prefrontal cortex time to come online, evaluate and problem solve. So worry's future-based. What it is, it's a concern for what could happen in the future. So if you think about this in an exam environment, that worry, perhaps you come up against a question you don't know, and it might just trigger that worry. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do this exam. It's way too hard. And then you're kind of going down that, what I call rabbit hole. Yeah. So, and you're not going to be able to think clearly when you're in that state. So we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness soon, and mindfulness is a great strategy to help us become more aware of what's happening in the present moment so that we can employ those coping strategies to help us manage it. There is another great app. It's called Worry Time by Reach Out. And what it actually talks about is having a worry time each day. So setting aside 5-10 minutes each day where you actually write down or document those things that are worrying you. with the goal to getting them out so they're not constantly sitting in the back of your mind feeling unheard or unmet. Okay. Emotional regulation. So when we talk about emotional regulation, it's that learning how to understand, label, and accept our emotions. So often, some of those uncomfortable emotions like fear, like anger, are ones that we tend to turn away from rather than turn towards because they don't feel good. Okay. Being able to identify and regulate our emotions will actually reduce our vulnerability to them, okay? So that we can feel a little bit more in control rather than them controlling us. It can also then, impact how we're behaving and how we're being in the world so we're not causing further suffering to ourselves or others. So negative or painful emotions aren't actually always bad. If you think about the fear response, it can be a really appropriate emotion that's designed to protect us. So, if you think about walking down the street of a nighttime and you hear something and it triggers that fear, that's all. That's a safety thing. Is there something I need to be concerned about in my environment at this time? So fear, I think, can feel really uncomfortable, as I said, and scary. So our brain will try and act to protect us. So if you think about a situation that's not actually life-threatening that brings up fear, a teacher asking you a question or one of the academics or lecturers asking you a question in class. So for some people that can produce a lot of fear. It can, that self-talk starts going, what if I get it wrong? People are going to laugh at me. I'm not smart enough to be here. Those spiraling thoughts. You might actually, at that point feel the desire to just run from the room or get swallowed up into a hole. So you might feel your face starts to flash and you're red and you're thinking everybody's going to know how I'm feeling here. So you kind of mumble something to get the attention away from yourself, but it doesn't necessarily feel good. Okay. So what we can do to support ourselves to feel calmer and more present in that moment, this is a strategy that can help us, is the RAIN strategy. So we can recognize that feeling we're experiencing. We can name it. So if we talk through the previous example using this, it might be that, I know this feeling. I'm feeling a bit afraid. I know because I've felt afraid before, it's only temporary. This isn't going to stay with me forever. It doesn't feel good, but I know it's there. Yeah. So we're just allowing that feeling to be there. We're not trying to push it away. We're sort of accepting that it's there and we know that it will pass. We then might want to investigate that feeling with a sense of kindness. Okay, so how does it actually feel to be afraid in my body? Where do I feel that most strongly? So, for me, my toes start to curl. My stomach just feels like there's a million butterflies in there. You might feel your cheeks flushing. So I love it in winter because my hands are a bit cold. You notice that difference, whereas in summer, we're all hot here, aren't we? So, but this is the point where you might like to just do what we call some grounding strategies. So grounding strategies are things that kind of bring us back to that present moment. So you might want to just wiggle your toes in your shoes, feel that feet under the ground there. You might like to just have a breath and gaze around the room. Okay, and we're going to talk about those strategies a little bit more because they're some of my favorites. But those are things that are always with us, the ability to take a breath and slow down. And being able to gaze around the room just helps us. If you think about, when you're scared of something, you're kind of darting. Whereas if we're calm and collected and gazing around or orienting to our environment, it can signal to our system that we're not actually under threat. So those are some things you might want to do there as you investigate what's happening in your body and how you can actually tend to that. And then that non-identification. So this isn't who I am. Just because I'm feeling fearful doesn't mean that, I'm not clever enough or I can't do it. I'm not going to attach myself to that emotion. I am afraid, but I could try answering the question. I might just say, I'm wondering if the answer might have something to do with this. Yeah. In my experience, you're going to be met with, an attitude of from your academics, good on you for giving it a try. Yeah, that's partly right. But what I'm actually talking about is, so it's an opportunity to learn. So we want to build on our experiences. So if we build on that experience of not answering the question and feeling bad, next time you get asked a question in class, I'm going to assume and kind of preempt that it's going to feel worse than the first time, because you're going to have that memory of, oh, last time I couldn't do this and it felt really bad. Yeah. You might even start sitting outside class, or, doing your lectures from home, or avoiding that situation. If we actually change that and we kind of give some sort of answer, even if we know that it might not be right, we could say that I'm not really sure of what the answer is. That's actually building on our experience of being able to acknowledge the fear that's going on and do the thing that feels scary anyway. And then, it didn't actually turn out as bad as what I thought. Next time it's going to feel a bit easier to be able to do that. Okay. So self-compassion. This is a tool that we can use to decrease stress and improve resilience. So what self-compassion actually does is it soothes that alarm system in the amygdala. So it tells our brain we're okay and we're safe. And it can help us combat self-criticism. So as we talked about before, that self-criticism kind of sends off that alarm system that something's wrong. But what you can actually do there is, and, we talked about before, imagine you're talking to a friend. If it feels too hard to kind of think of what you could say to yourself, you might imagine a wise person. So someone who has been really helpful or protective towards you in the past, you might imagine them talking to you. It could be a real person. It could be fictional. It could be your favorite superhero, but if you're finding yourself struggling to be kind to yourself, what would someone else do or say to you? Or what would you do or say for someone else? Oh. Self-care. So this is a bit of a buzzword, but it's so essential for our mental well-being. So self-care really is just about undertaking those activities that make us feel better about ourselves. Okay. So if you think about, I'm not sure if everyone's heard the cup analogy, but if you have a cup and throughout the day you're tending to your kids, you're doing your study, maybe your husband's pants need, you're looking after everyone else and giving them a little bit from what's in your cup, it can empty out. So we need to refill that so we have enough for ourselves and to keep giving to others as well. So that's what self-care is, what fills your cup. And this is really individual. It's important to find the things that feel right for you, not just do the things that your friends might do. Okay. So, for example, I'm not an overly athletic people. Some people love going to the gym and sweating it out and that high intensity exercise. For me, it's about going to a yoga class where I spend most of the hour long on the floor just stretching. But that for me is really fills my cup immensely, and that's my self-care. So if I sent myself to a gym class, I would probably be more stressed. So find those things that work for you. And I wonder, even if you have a look at that wheel now, whether you can identify, is there, an area perhaps where I am lacking at the moment that I could build on? What's something that jumps out at me from this list that feels like something that would be really nourishing and supportive and I would really enjoy doing? And just thinking about, I know that as a university student, you can become time poor. It's important to prioritize time for self-care. If you think about what we're talking about in stress, so if self-care is kind of the antidote to stress, if you don't factor that into your equation as a university student, your stress levels are going to continue to build and build and build to the point where you become overwhelmed, maybe burnt out as a student. If you look at, I need to do my weekly lectures, but I also need to do something for myself, to help me continue to achieve in the way that I want to do, to manage those stress levels, balance them out so that I can continue to keep going. So it is a priority and should be a priority for all of us. I will say I don't always practice what I preach either. I know it's hard sometimes to fit that in. So what about mindfulness? Who's heard about mindfulness, and which image do you think depicts it best? Is it that mind full of activity and thoughts and what's coming next and what I need to do? Or is it the one on the right? Finding some space and time just to focus on the few things that are in front of me at this point. It is the one on the right. So mindfulness is the practice of cultivating non-judgmental awareness of the mind and body in everyday life. We do this by focusing on the present moment and experiences that are happening now and letting go of what's come before and what will come next. We pay attention to our experiences and how they impact us in the moment. It can help us become more aware of what triggers our stress. If we're tuned into ourselves, we might notice a little bit earlier that we're feeling those signs of stress. We might notice how that impacts us, and therefore that can allow us to choose a more considered response to dealing with it rather than getting caught up into that reactivity of feeling stressed. So a really beautiful mindfulness activity that you can do, and you can do this anywhere. I've talked with lots of students about doing this in a placement setting, in a practical exam setting, in a theoretical exam setting, in class when their teachers ask them a question. So what it is the mindfulness stop. So it's basically about stopping what you're doing, whether that's physically or mentally. Sometimes we can't physically stop, but mentally stopping that cycle of stress building up. Might be our thoughts, whatever's happening. So if it's safe, you can close your eyes. So if it's at home and you're about to do some study, you might like to practice this before you actually sit down and hit the books, just to have a bit of a tune in. So if you can't close your eyes, you might just want to relax your gaze. Then you're going to want to take a breath, okay? You want to pay attention to your breath. Maybe take a slow breath while I'm talking through this. Can you feel the cool air going in? Can you feel the warm air coming out as you breathe? As you breathe in, you can add a word to that. It might be, I am here. I feel calm. As you breathe out, it might be reminding yourself to relax, let go of the day. So finding those words again, finding what works for you. And we're going to talk about breathing in a moment, because something we all do, but being able to take a mindful breath can be something you need to fine tune a little. You want to observe your thoughts. So what are my thoughts saying? What are those emotions doing? What sensations can I feel in my body? Okay. Grounding. So what can I hear? Engaging our senses can help us be in the moment. What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I feel? Can I feel my cardigan on my body? Does it feel comfortable? Feel that ground beneath your feet. Yeah. So take a moment just to calm, just to orientate, and then proceed with your day. Yeah. So just pausing for a moment can help power down that stress response. It calms your amygdala. It gets that prefrontal cortex online, which you need for study. So that's responsible for our reasoning, our problem solving, comprehension. That's that creativity and perseverance. And it activates that parasympathetic nervous system we talked about earlier, that rest and digest. So as I said, breathing's something we all do, but paying attention to our breath and bringing awareness to it can help us intentionally breathe in a way that actually signals to our body that we're more calm. So by sighing or doing a sigh, when you think about it, it's our body's natural way of relieving stress. So A sigh is a longer out breath than an in breath. Yeah. So it's getting more air out than we're breathing in. It's actually getting that breath right down to the diaphragm or the belly. Okay. That's important. And it's slowing our breath down. Often when we're stressed, we will have short, sharp breathing right up here in our chest. So I say to people when you're practicing this, do what feels comfortable for you. Don't force your breath. Don't make yourself feel dizzy or, it's just about playing around with it and practicing. So what we're actually wanting to do is, get our breaths to be longer, deeper, and slower to support our nervous systems to settle and encourage our body to relax. And I'm going to talk you through a couple of breaths just to see what it feels like. So please join in if you want. If you've got your cameras off, you can turn them off if you want to. But the thing I love about breathing, it's free, it's accessible. Nobody's going to know. We can pull this out in any setting to help ourselves calm down without other people being aware of this. So what we're actually going to do, one method you can use is the box breath. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to count our breath and we're going to inhale, hold it, exhale, and then hold it again. So when you're ready, we're going to start with breathing in for 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to hold that down in our bellies for 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to let that go for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I also like a triangle breath. I don't like to hold so much. So we're going to do that one now. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to breathe out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll do another 2. So in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And letting it out slowly for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this one's going to go down nice, deep and slow for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And relax and let it go for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. So it is about finding what works for you, and it is about practicing it regularly. The thing with these coping strategies and finding these ways to support ourselves is if we don't practice them in the moments when we're not so stressed, they can be really hard to access when we are stressed. We can forget them. So if we take time each day, it might be on waking up. It might be a practice I do before I sit down and study. It might be as I'm walking to the refectory. It might be before I go to sleep at night. I'm going to spend 5 minutes just doing some long, slow breaths. We can begin to feel the impact of that and have it more readily accessible to us when we need it. Okay, so remember, there's no utopia. There's no perfect calm that's going to come when using coping strategies, but they can support us to grow this inner sense of calm and perhaps moments where life feels pretty darn good. So if we go back to that trip that I had this morning through the traffic lights and waiting for the train, how would using my coping strategies have supported me to manage stress better in this instance? Okay. I could have practiced accepting that red traffic lights happen. And when I'm running late, they feel frustrating and stressful, but acknowledge that these feelings don't have to define my day. I could have used that time to take a few breaths. I could have focused on where I felt tense in my body and focused on trying to release some of that tension. I could have reframed my thoughts to say that being late's not the end of the world and I'd rather arrive feeling happy. I might have an expectation that I will be late at my appointment and I'm not going to make up that time by speeding through the lights and yelling at other drivers. So other people might get taken in before me, and that's okay because I'm still going to get seen. Perhaps I can even use that time to listen to one of my favorite songs. For me, music's a big coping strategy. So imagine how different I would have felt in that instance as compared to the earlier example. So what we're going to dive into now, and I realize I've gone over, I do love to have a chat. So we've not got too much more, Trixie.
Keep going. Great.
I just want to go through with you guys what some of the university offerings are for you as students to help you to manage stress and cope, okay? So sometimes, despite our best efforts, we're unable to manage these stressful times and we need to ask for help. It can feel like the hard thing to do, but it can be the right thing to do. So you've got a team of student counsellors that work and provide free and confidential support to all of the students of this university. You can contact us to make an appointment. You can phone, you can email. There's also an online form. So we also have a designated social and emotional wellbeing officer, counsellor, Jade, who's up in Rocky, who supports our First Nations students if that's their preference. We also offer an out of hours student support line. So when student counselling isn't open, so of an afternoon, a weeknight, so from 4:30 through till 8 o'clock in the morning, all weekend, all public holidays, so 24 hours a day on the weekends and public holidays, there is an out of hours student support line. So if you need to ring someone, if you're feeling overwhelmed studying in the middle of the night and you feel like it's starting to, get to the point you can't manage that yourself, you can ring and talk to someone and they will support you in that moment, and then ask the question, do you want to be referred to counselling, or do you feel that this has been helpful and you're okay to go on now? So there's that option as well. We have a new student wellbeing hub that's available on Moodle. So we have had a hub there before, but there is some new things that will be included in this, including some fabulous digital resources. But, all of the wellbeing offerings can be found there. So some of the digital resources, we have a healthy eating guide, which is designed by a student for students. So some great tips and strategies and assessments to assess where your nutrition's at, and some, cheap, easy, achievable ways that you can actually make those changes. We have a great wellbeing care pack that has lots of mindfulness strategies and activities in there that you can do yourself. And our new tip sheets are fabulous. So if you get a moment, go and check them out. There's lots there. There's ones on depression, anxiety, self-care, exam stress, all those things that are relevant to students, just to provide a bit of information around what it might look like and how you can support yourself with that. For our First Nations students and staff, we have an online cuppa and yarn every week at Thursday at 11. So there's more information about that there. And for everyone, we also have a calm time. So this happens once a week during term time. And it's a 30-minute guided online meditation session. You can attend, you don't have to have your camera on if you don't feel comfortable with that. But it's about sort of meeting with others intentionally to take that moment for yourself. If you attend 3 of those, they'll actually give you a year subscription to the Calm app as well, which is a really great resource. So check that out if you feel that would be helpful for you. We've got our Study Smarts program. So this is a self-paced program online that gives you tips for starting study, how you set goals, manage your time, and strategies to help you have, successful study experience. We also offer some workshops for students. So we have a Cultivating Wellbeing one, which is all about that emotional regulation, managing challenging feelings, and, how we bring that into our relationships. So that's offered once a term, including term 3 as well. And that one is offered firstly to our counselling students. And then if there's available space, because it is a popular one, we kind of put it out wider, but we do offer it to our counselling students first. Another one that's for everyone, and this is one of our newer ones, is healthy relationships. So if that's something you feel you would benefit from, you can get in touch with us at counselling and just get your name put down that you're interested to do that one. We also regularly run, and we had one here on campus last week, which was fabulous, our mental health first aid training. So that's all about how we can support ourselves and others who are experiencing some mental health challenges. So in our everyday lives, how we can do that. So if you get an opportunity to do that, strongly encourage. I think that would benefit anyone and everyone. And just a little shout out for Are You OK Day. So that'll be coming up on the 14th of September this year. And we will have some events over at the refectory for those in Bundy. The other campuses will have stuff as well. So check that out as it gets closer. You know, that's all about checking in with those people around us and just asking that question, are you okay? And also, you know, giving ourselves the tools that we need to actually manage the answers that they might give us to that. There's also a podcast series, which I haven't actually tuned into, but I'm going to make some time for. So it's about student stories and for students who've had lived experience of mental health and how they actually face their struggles and what they learned. So yeah, I'm assuming it's going to be really useful, just like all the other resources, but haven't listened to it myself yet. But check that one out if that's something that you think will be good for you. Okay, and I thought we might just stop and pause and take a bit of a stretch, shake it out, take a sighing breath, do what you need to at the moment just to finish off. Feel your feet on the floor, little butterfly hug. This is just little tapping motion here, can be quite calming and soothing for some people. Have a bit of a look around the room. And that's me done talking. So thank you so much for listening. Happy now to, if we've got time, stay on board and answer a few questions if there are some. But that is how you get in touch with counselling and myself. If you do have any questions that you're not wanting to sort of bring to this forum but would like to get in touch, please feel free to do that. Thank you.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And the student counselling team have got such a great range of resources to support all the students. So I really encourage our students to think about going and accessing any of these resources, because as I said in the chat just then, it is better to be proactive than reactive. So be proactive, take care of yourself. I'm going to just stop the recording.